Thank you, sir. Mrs. Chambers, can we continue to examine in general terms how tickets were processed in the SSE, focusing in particular on the extent to which it was a part of the system to identify the extent to which an error, bug or a defect afflicted other parts of the estate? And can we start by looking, please, at Fujitsu FUJ 308 2274. And this is a KEL titled Multiple Cash Declarations May Cause Incorrect Figures in Discrepancy, Variance and Balance Reports. It was raised, you'll see, by Mark Scardifield on the 15th of July 2005 and was last updated by you on the 27th of November 2007. If we look at the symptoms, please. Thank you. A cash declaration was made in stock balancing for the amount displayed on the snapshot. When the cash variance was checked afterwards, a gain of £45.05 was displayed, and then a string of characters may get postmasters calling in to state that they've been declaring cash but have been getting varying discrepancies reporting, even though they've been declaring the same amount of cash each time, or that they've done a transfer but are getting a discrepancy equal to the amount of the transfer, or that the system hasn't transferred the cash out of the stock unit. In terms of the problem, the underlying problem is that we cache the current trading period for a stock unit and rely on a mechanism in Riposte to notify us of new transactions across the outlet to keep up this cash to date. When this fails, it affects discrepancy, variance and balance reports and has the effect of presenting the clerk with incorrect information. This will be potentially confusing and may lead to the clerk making unnecessary corrections. These will show up as future inconsistencies, e.g. Nothing gets lost in the end. And so is it right that this is identifying another problem with the Riposte system?
Yes, I think the underlying error was thought to be in Riposte itself.
And is it identifying a known problem with Riposte?
It's identifying a problem in Riposte. I'm not sure. I mean, it's known in that it's now being documented.
I see. And so it's recording that some figures might be wrong, which might lead a sub-postmaster or a clerk to make updating changes, which would then create a problem when the figures were corrected.
If they were to make those changes, then yes, they would then have to undo those extra changes.
And so in order to ensure no losses, if the sub-postmaster made the unnecessary corrections, would they need to recognise the error and reconcile it, whether by making a transaction correction or getting a transaction correction or otherwise?
Yes, it would depend at what point they noticed that something was wrong. In the cases that I can remember seeing, including the call that we looked at this morning, the postmaster was very aware that these problems, that the figures were wrong, and phoned in to complain and was advised to reboot and so on to avoid it. So in that case, he or she didn't take any extra action except doing a reboot, and then when they started again, the figures were all correct.
And the solution is given as the declare cash problem clears itself overnight. If the postmaster logs a call on the day he's having problems, ask him to try the following workaround. The clerk should log out of the effective counter. Another clerk attached to a different individual, not shared stock unit, should log into the same counter, declare cash for his own stock unit, then log out. The first clerk can now log into the same counter and declare cash again. the variance should be correctly recalculated. Alternatively, log on to a different counter and do the cash declaration there if the workaround is not successful or the problem does not clear itself overnight. Send a call to the SSC, otherwise no call is needed. November 2007, a fix is currently being piloted and is likely to be sent to the whole estate in January. Presumably that would be January 2008.
Yeah.
And so that fix appears to be planned to be sent out in January 2008 for a problem that was identified in July 2005.
So I think the problem in 2005, the one that was found during testing, it's not, I can't tell if it was exactly the same problem that then persisted. I don't recall, well, from what I've seen on the various bits of information documents that I've reviewed about this problem, it looks as if it started happening in live, or at least was noticed more in live sometime in 2006.
But still a year and a half, 2 years.
It's still a long, very long time, yeah.
And can you explain, was that normal? It would take a year and a half, 2 years for something to work its way through the system for a fix?
That was unusual. I mean, if it depends so much on the sort of what problem it is. I mean, if it's a very contained problem, easy to reproduce, we know if we do ABC, this is going to happen, then those sort of problems are usually relatively easy to fix and to test and to get the fix out into live. This was not such a straightforward problem. I'm not sure if anybody ever actually managed to replicate it. We didn't have a sequence of events that would make it happen. And so in the end, the fix, I believe, was quite a large one, which involved sort of redesigning and rewriting an area of code to sort of completely change the way it worked. And so obviously that's both a bigger job to do, and then it has to go through a full test cycle, and because it's something like that is more likely to have knock-on effects than something which is very self-contained.
At the foot of the page, under evidence, the KEL says, if there's any pattern of failure, e.g. it is occurring on the same counter repeatedly, can the audit log be recovered if this occurs, please?
That's obviously the counter log that I had forgotten about. I had a feeling that there might have been another one, and that must be it.
Would that log not routinely be obtained where there was a concern over a system failure raised like this?
Yes, it probably was, because I think that's probably the one that had some diagnostics and things written to it.
That's what I was going to ask. What is the audit log being referred to there?
As I said, I think that must be the file, and there was probably looking at that. I'm not sure if that was a day of the week, so there would only have been 7 of them, or if that would have been a date in there, but it wouldn't be something that persisted for very long.
Why would the audit log only be of interest if there was a repeated failure?
Well, I think it's because then, no, it probably would have been of interest anyway.
Why does it say if there's a pattern of failure?
I don't know. I don't know
obtain
who
the
put that
audit
on
log.
there.
Can you think of a reason why one would only obtain the audit log if there was a pattern of failure?
No. I think you'd probably obtain it anyway, but as I said, I'm afraid until this moment I had totally forgotten its existence.
Can we look at a peak, please? Poll 302 8746. This is a peak 0103864 raised, you'll see under the progress narrative, on the 3rd of June 2004 after a sub-postmaster reported problems with transfers. You can see that 4 lines in. Summary, postmaster reports, you had a problem with some transfers. Yes? Can you see that?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And was the problem on this, recorded by this peak, a discrepancy arising after transfers which were being replicated twice?
Yes, you should only, a transfer is when you're moving cash or stock from one stock unit to another. And you should only have been allowed for one transfer out, just to do the transfer in the one time. If for some reason, and there were various underlying reasons why it might be possible, you could do the same, accept it in twice, then you would have a discrepancy and also a receipts and payments mismatch.
And if we look at the foot of the page, please, at the entry for the 3rd of June at 11:25, it's about 10, 12 lines up from the bottom. Thank you. Information, postmaster reports that the transaction log shows only one transfer out for each item, but the transfers in show that each transaction has been accepted into the BB.
That would be the name of the stock unit.
Twice, and this has caused him a discrepancy, and he would like this investigated. This call was passed to HSH from Tier 2 at the MBSC, and they have also requested that the problem be investigated. And then if we see what happened, if we go over the page, please, and look at the foot of the page at 10, if we go down a bit, please. Yes, 10, 19, 14 on the 8th of June, passed to, I think, your colleague, Catherine Obeng, yes? Mm-hmm. All nodes were connected at the time that the transfer in transactions were attempted. No session transfers took place that day. Event log from node 4 suggests that riposte replication had not been successful. And so while node 3 had successfully TI'd the transactions, this information was not apparent to node 4. Thus it was perceived by node 4 that those transactions were outstanding, waiting to be TI'd. Therefore, when the user logged onto node 4, he was presented with outstanding transfer message, which had to be accepted or declined. The user chose to accept them, even though he tells me at this stage he was a little concerned because he was certain that the other user had already transacted on node 3. This has created a discrepancy on their cash account of £22,290. Also, the host has reported a reconciliation error for £44,580.
Yep.
So essentially, reading this, was this a software error which had then been compounded by an action taken by the sub-postmaster in the face of an apparent error?
That looks like the likely reason.
And a significant sum of money was involved by way of discrepancy.
Yeah. And it did show up on one of our automatic reconciliation reports, so even if the postmaster hadn't realised what had happened, we would have been investigating it anyway.
And how complete was the coverage of that automated system?
Certainly anything that showed up, yes, all entries on the major reconciliation reports would have calls raising for them, and SSC would have looked at each one.
We can see, if we go to page 4, please, that 2/3 of the way down, at an entry for 15/11/29, Martin McConnell says attached will be a spreadsheet and the set of transactions that I think are responsible for the error. The spreadsheet is all transactions that account stock unit BB and I have presented the data, presented a data view for the discrepancies committed. I do not even know if I'm expected to be doing a summary inspection. Nevertheless, The attached gives a view as stated. As far as the system is concerned, there appears to be a flaw in riposte, informing counter 4 that the transfer object, a number of stock unit PP is given, has been erased. This is an issue riposte problem as far as I am concerned. The transfer mechanism already has a belt and braces approach. If we can't trust the underlying software to replicate this information through to all other counters, what are we supposed to be able to do? If someone wants to press for a fix, I suggest this is pointed at the Isha team for them to sort out. The question there, and I realise this isn't you writing it, if someone wants to press for a fix, why might that even be an issue, whether you would press for a fix or not? There's a substantial sum of money by way of discrepancy here, drawn to the attention of Fujitsu by the sub-postmaster themselves. What would be the reasons for not pressing for a fix?
Whether it could be worked out in precisely what circumstances this error had occurred, I suppose. I mean, these transfers were happening successfully at many branches at many times, so I agree there's investigation needed to try and find out why this particular one didn't work. Could we see if Catherine said anything else before she passed it over to development?
Yes, if we go back to...
Just go up a little bit.
Page 3. And then scroll down.
Right, so maybe there isn't... I'm sorry, I can't see the whole picture, so...
If we zoom out, please, then it becomes too small. If you zoom in and just go to the entry starting 8th of June at 14:45, 49, thank you.
I just wondered if there had been any other information, any events or anything that gave any more of a clue as to why the problem had occurred, but I can't see anything else that's being recorded on there. So, yes, I mean, obviously you'll think you want this problem fixed, but if you can't reproduce the problem or get any closer to the circumstances which has caused it, it's not necessarily going to be fixable.
It was an error that just stays on the system.
If it's something that has happened this one time and we cannot see any reason for it, then possibly yes.
What about if it was for a smaller sum of money, for £100, and the sub-postmaster was told before it got to the SSC, you just need to make that up, that £100?
No, anything like that, anything, because as well as it being reported by the branch, it would also have been on the reconciliation reports, and we looked at those regardless of the amount of money.
There was
because
no low... I'm sorry.
No, because it is indicating, yes, there is a fault in the system.
Can we go on, please, to page 5? And look at the third entry on the page, also from your colleague, Catherine Obeng, 1630-17. Martin McConnell's recommendation is to put the £22,290, which is adrift, into the suspense account. Was money adrift at this point? Is that the right way to describe it?
Well, it's a loss that the branch should not have been liable for.
I'm routing the call, says Ms Obeng, to MSU to raise an error notice to inform Pol of this incident. Also, please notify NBSC to contact the postmaster and advise him of this course of action. So we're now, I think, on the 11th of June, the incident having arisen on the 3rd of June.
Yeah.
And so somebody was to contact the NBSC.
Well,
the MSU were.
the first or second line support would probably
Contact
be
the NBSC.
expected to contact NBSC.
And then NBSC have got to contact the sub-postmaster themselves.
That's what it says here, yes.
And how would NBSC communicate accurately what had been established on the previous 5 pages of this document?
I don't know, that it's not made terribly clear there that, you know, this was a system error, but that we had informed Post Office and that the branch should expect an error notice at some point. There is an error there in that it says the call's routed to MSU to raise an error notice. MSU couldn't do that. They would raise a BIMS report which would be sent to the Post Office financial people, and then they could raise the error notice.
BIMS being a business incident management report.
Could well be.
Well, that was the acronym used, I think, at the time.
Right, I couldn't remember what it stood for.
Okay. And so here we are at the 11th of June with the SSC telling other parts of Fujitsu to tell the post office to contact the sub-postmaster to inform him of this incident. Did the NBSC have access to this peak?
Hang on, the postmaster already knew about the incident because he'd
Yes.
raised the call in the first place.
Yes. Sorry, to inform Pole of this incident. Please notify the NBSC to contact the postmaster and advise him of this course of action. Did the NBSC have access to this peak so that they could say to the sub-postmaster, don't worry, it's not you, there's a bug?
I don't know. And I don't know what the second or first line support who would have notified the NBSC would have passed through to the postmaster.
And then if we scroll down, please, to the 22nd of June. Um, 153646, the call record has been transferred to the team MSU. Yes?
Yes.
And then if we look at the entry immediately below from Michael King, reconciliation data provided to Pole, routing back to the EDSC. Does this need to be routed to Isha for a fix? From this record, can you see whether any action had been taken to progress any fix by Fujitsu with Isha?
Not at that point, because that's Michael King in MSU who had informed Post Office via BIMS, and now he's routing the call back to EDSC, which is SSC.
And then if we scroll down to 11:59:27 on the 23rd of June, where Ms. Obeng comments, problem could have been avoided if the postmaster had not accepted the second TI. The riposte error events were apparent on SMC's Tivoli website. However, they took no action until the postmaster raised the call about the dodgy transfers. In future, SMC would need to monitor these events and contact the office, requesting that they avoid using the eventing node and reboost it. A KEL has now been updated on info on what action SMC should take if an event occurs during post office business hours.
Right. Belatedly, I now have the information that there were riposte error events that were occurring. That wasn't mentioned earlier in the peak, which it very usefully could have been done. So this, I think, is bug 2 in the list of bugs.
Which we're going to come to in more detail later today or tomorrow.
But that explains why the replication didn't happen and what the cause of this particular problem was.
But this bug appears to have been picked up by reason of a call from the sub-postmaster, not by Fujitsu's reconciliation process.
Oh, there would have been separate calls for those as well, but they haven't been linked on here. But it does say further up in the call that the branch has appeared on, I think, at least 3 of the reports.
It appears to be accepted that there's a problem with Riposte failing appropriately to pick up the transactions. We've seen so far the possibility of a fix by Isha has been raised. And here Ms. Obeng is suggesting that this could have all been avoided if the postmaster hadn't accepted the second transaction.
That is strictly true, but unhelpful in that the postmaster was prompted to accept it and did so. So I certainly would not say it was in any way his fault, because it was not.
Can we go on to page 6, please? And look at the entry for 11/17/09. Customer call. Repeat call. Auditor for post office site had called in to see what is happening with call. Advised I will call back, ringing through to SSC Barbara to find out what's happening. Spoke with Barbara, and SSC advised Catherine is on leave and she'll try to get someone to look at the call and call me back. So it seems like either the sub-postmaster or an auditor in the branch is chasing now on the 6th of July.
Yes. What was the previous date?
Well, the call was opened on the 3rd of June.
Right, yeah. It's
And the previous entry by Miss Obeng was 11th of June and then the 23rd of June.
Yeah. So it sounds as if nothing has been resolved as far as the postmaster is concerned, and now there is an auditor on site.
And then the entry below, it's 11/20/40, spoke with Auditor John, advised third line are going to look at the call and call back, advised I will call them back as soon as I can. Yes?
Yes.
And then I think later that day at 11:44
Yeah.
is the first time that you become involved.
The first time that my name has appeared on here, certainly.
Yes. And you say, I've checked with Mike King, the BIMS report for this problem was sent to the post office on the 22nd of June and should have resulted in an error notice being sent to the branch. Mike says he'll send a note to the post office saying that the postmaster has been chasing this issue. I've asked HSH to inform the postmaster that they should have received an error notice and to check with the department that issues them. The corrected cash account that was sent still had a receipts and payments mismatch. The double transfer in caused a mismatch both because of the transfer and because of the discrepancy which has been erroneously generated. The host calculated CA
Cash account.
ignores the transfer, but it is still affected by the accepted discrepancy, which should not have been generated. It's not really possible to provide a fully balanced cash account. Email on this subject sent by Nick Peach to Richard Brunskill, then on to John Moran. I've not seen the outcome of this. So you say that a BIMS notice was sent, in fact, way back on the 22nd of June
Yes.
and should have been sent to the branch?
Should have resulted in an error notice being sent to the branch.
Yes. Did you speak to the auditor at all?
It doesn't look like it, no.
Can you see from this whether anyone spoke to the auditor?
Well, the help desk were asked to inform the postmaster, but I don't think we ever had a phone number for the auditor, or I certainly didn't have a phone number for the auditor. And HSH had been the ones speaking to him.
If we can go on to the 12th of July, please. Thank you. if we look at the last entry for the 12th of July, the one dated, timed at 12:56:23, an ad has been sent to Pinnacle, and then a number is given. Tina, MBSC, confirms there is an outstanding error notice, but she could not get the exact details. She will call Paul Whitaker, the investigation officer, on, and then a number is given. So it appears that by the 12th of July, an investigations manager is now involved.
It looks like it from what's recorded there.
I mean, that appears to be as a result of the call earlier in the day. If you just look at the top of the page we're looking at 11:58:56. Investigation manager Paul Whitaker wants to confirm that an error notice is being sent out for the discrepancy at the post office, and then the call's transferred to the MBSC.
Yes, because error notices were not visible in any way to Fujitsu.
And then I think we no need to look at it on the 5th of August. It's confirmed that an error notice has indeed been issued.
Yes.
Taking a step back, would this be right? And realising that you had transient involvement in the middle of this process, that a period of time between the 3rd of August, the 3rd of June, and the 5th of August, some 3 months, appears to show the sub-postmaster having an auditor and an investigator in his branch at the same time that there was an identified system problem which caused the discrepancy, not him.
Yes, it does look like that, except it's only 2 months, but I agree with what
Yes, you're quite right. Beginning of June to the beginning of August, you're quite right.
Yes, I mean, and I think as far as we were concerned, you know, we had informed Post Office, and the ball was then in their court to produce an error notice to sort out the impact on the branch. But that obviously presumably wasn't known clearly what had happened by all the people who then were involved in a branch investigation.
Was that a feature of your work, that there were balls being passed between sides of the court? With one side of the court being Fujitsu and the other side of the court being the Post Office, and you would bat it over to the other side of the court?
I wouldn't put it in those terms, but I think we felt when we had done our side of the investigation and notified Post Office of this, and then it was up to them really to produce the error notice and resolve the implications.
Would you agree that a fair reading of these exchanges is that the only reason this was bottomed out was due, firstly, to the sub-postmaster continuing to complain, and secondly, in fact, due to your intervention?
The information had been sent to Post Office saying that this branch has made a loss as a result of this problem, which they shouldn't be liable for. That was done well before my involvement. But whether Post Office, I don't recall that we got any, well, it doesn't look as if we got anything back from Post Office themselves saying, we don't understand this, what should we do about it, or whatever. So I can't explain the delay in it being resolved after the 22nd of June.
Was there a system in place to ensure that if a discrepancy was identified as being caused by a systems error, that everyone on both sides of the court was aware of it as soon as possible, and that no action was taken against the sub-postmaster, so that he wouldn't, as in this example, end up with having an auditor and an investigator in his branch?
No, I think once we had felt we had done our side of things, then we wouldn't find out what had happened between post office and the branch.
Thank you, that can come down. Can we turn to paragraph 20 of your witness statement, please, where you address the issue of communication with sub-postmasters? Paragraph 20 is on page 5. You say you were asked to consider whether the system was adequate to manage active service tickets. You say, I did not consider that the system impeded our work, but I'm asked specifically as to whether I think there were potential changes that would have improved the systems. The problem I would identify was that the system assumed only one person or team needed to be actively working on the peak ticket at any one time, whereas this was not always the case. If the postmaster who'd raised the service ticket telephoned for an update, HSD might put that request on the Power Help system, which they operated, and that might not get copied to the peak, depending on which option was chosen, which might not be noticed by the developer or tester who owned the call at that moment, who would not expect to give an update to a postmaster. Before we explore exactly what you mean there, can you remind us of what the Power Help system was?
Power Help was the first and second line desks call logging system.
And so it was operated and viewable by only lines 1 and 2, is that right?
SSC could see the Power Help calls as well.
And did you habitually look at what was on Power Help?
Quite often, yes.
You say if the postmaster who raised the service ticket telephoned for an update, HSD might put that request on the Power Help system, and it might or might not get copied to the peak. Was there not an instruction to put that request on Power Help and to copy it onto the peak?
Yes, the way it worked, I can't now remember the precise wording, but if they added an update onto Power Help, one sort of update automatically got copied to peak and the other sort didn't, and the help desk didn't always use the right category.
And was anything done about that?
I think we used to remind them quite frequently to use OTI update or something. I can't remember what it's called, but I think I've seen a peak where we specifically say, make sure you, sorry, I've seen a KEL or something where we specifically say, if you get any more information, use this particular way of doing it.
And so this problem that you described there may lead to left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing.
Yes, it can do, or information just not being passed through to the people who are probably being expected to give an answer.
In paragraph 21, you refer to another problem with the peak system. You say that if a problem had a financial impact, it was necessary to inform the post office via the MSU team, often via the MSU team, while separately it was necessary to look for the root causes, which might involve passing the problem to the development team for consideration of a code fix, and also to check whether any other branches had been or might be affected by the same problem. That might result in 2 or more people trying to work on the same peak.
Yes.
What was the difficulty caused by 2 or more people working on or trying to work on the same peak?
I suppose basically you were meant to be working on the peaks that were allocated to you, and if it was allocated to somebody else, then it wasn't allocated to you. I think we saw in that previous call that we've just looked at, Catherine passed the call over to development for their comments, so Martin McConnell did some work on it, and it was only after he had then, I think, passed it back that she passed it then to MSU for them to notify Post Office of the problem. Now, what I might well have passed it to MSU first, or, as I go on to say in the next paragraph, to clone it so you could send one call to MSU to pursue the rectification of the deficit, the discrepancy that shouldn't have occurred. And then the second call can go on to developments at the same time so they can start investigating the root cause.
And further on this issue of passing things back to the post office and then down to the sub-postmaster, can we look please at paragraph 42, Roman 4, which is on page 12 of your witness statement. You just scroll down, thank you. You're here, this is the part of your statement where you're describing the teams that were working in this area. And you say MSU monitored reconciliation reports generated by the system each day, etc. And then the next sentence, MSU raised peaks so SSE could investigate cause and impact of every entry on the reconciliation reports. And then you say, my understanding is that MSU informed a team in the post office of any such errors which potentially had a financial impact on a branch via a BIM report, and then it was up to the post office to notify the branch and make any necessary correction. And that's essentially what you said a moment ago.
Yes.
How was it possible to determine whether a problem had a financial impact or not?
By us investigating what had happened and whether it did actually affect the branch figures in any way.
So you could tell for certain one way or another whether a problem had a financial impact on a sub-postmaster or not?
Yes, I think we could, because if the system had ended up producing figures that it would not have produced if the problem hadn't occurred, then there could well be a financial impact.
And why was it necessary to inform the post office of those problems where a financial impact had occurred?
So that the branch would not be held liable for that.
Was it the case that if a problem didn't have, or was judged to not have a financial impact, that the post office were not informed of it?
They wouldn't be informed via that route, no.
What different route would be used? So what different route was used?
Was there something that a different sort of a problem that had perhaps affected a lot of the estate would probably be notified to post office through the problem managers.
Did the post office inform you about the action that they had taken when they were notified of a problem that had a financial impact on a sub-postmaster?
No.
Did you know whether they therefore told them it's a system error, don't worry, or in fact they held them responsible for it?
No.
Why was there no record back to Fujitsu saying what had happened?
Because that was not in the process as far as I'm aware.
Do you know why it wasn't in the process?
No.
At this time, so between October 2000 and mid-2010, were you aware that the post office was relying on the Horizon system to produce data to prosecute sub-postmasters?
I was aware that there were a small number of prosecutions.
More broadly, if we look, please, at paragraph 53 of your witness statement, you address a range of situations in which the Post Office would have been informed in relation to the operation of Horizon. So that's page 17, please. You say, I'm asked whether Fujitsu took proactive steps to identify bugs or discrepancies in branch accounts caused by the same. The automatic cross-checks made and reported on the TPS, APS and banking reconciliation reports highlighted inconsistencies which might indicate a bug. These were always investigated, and MSU informed Post Office via BIM report if the bug had affected the branch accounts or accounts with other third parties. And in paragraph 66, which is on page 21, this is in the middle of dealing with bug 1, the receipts and payments mismatch bug. At the second line in paragraph 66, you say Post Office would have been informed of each instance. I'm not sure whether this was via a BIM report or some other route. Fujitsu would not have contacted branches directly unless the branch had raised the call in the first place. And in paragraph 149, please, when dealing with the counter replacement bug, that's page 44. Paragraph 149, 5 lines from the bottom, you say Post Office would have been sent a BIMS report if there was a lasting financial impact for a particular branch, but I don't know whether it was ever flagged as an ongoing problem. Were you personally involved in creating the BIMS reports?
No, but as I think I say somewhere, I did at some point find out that MSU were tending to copy and paste whatever we put in the peak and put that onto the BIMS report. So indirectly, yes, the words I was using were probably being passed on.
So you knew that what you were saying might end up in a BIMS report?
At some point I became aware of that, and I can't remember when.
So you didn't create the reports,
No.
but you provided information which you knew
Yes.
Might be used in the
Yes.
creation of a report.
Yes.
What do you know about the process by which BIMS reports were created and then communicated to the Post Office? How did that happen?
That was the job of the MSU staff, and I don't know any more than that.
Was there a process in place to ensure that certain types of information were always reported to the Post Office?
I don't know.
And where was the MSU sat within Fujitsu? Where was it based?
I think they were on the 5th floor at one point. I think by the time I left, they'd been sort of subsumed into SSC, or at least sat on the same floor as us.
But take the period before the advent of Horizon Online, so up to 2010, were they essentially a separate?
They were a
thing?
separate unit, and at some points it was only sort of 1 or 2 members of staff as well.
And what was their training? Do you know?
Their training?
Training and expertise?
I don't know.
Were they IT professionals?
Not particularly, I don't think.
Were they more in the nature of administrators?
I would have said so, yes, but I had no formal involvement with them. I did spend some time with them trying to help them understand in particular the way that the system was working to produce the reports, and also the flow of banking messages between the Horizon system and the banks and the various other parties involved, which were all part of the massive amount of reconciliation that was done for every single banking transaction. And that was, I did do a fair bit of trying to explain that to them, because then it just helped them understand what some of the different numbers on the reports meant for those entries.
The SSE was staffed with IT professionals.
Yes.
You were conducting detailed investigations
Yes.
on occasions into bugs, errors and defects.
Yes, anything over the entire very complicated Horizon infrastructure.
The principal method of transfer of that information as a result of the investigation was in a BIMS.
Yes, going back to the specific accounting type problems, yes, that the information about any impact on a branch was through a BIMS report.
What system was there for ensuring that the right information was passed back to the post office?
I don't know. This was all part of the responsibility of MSU and presumably the management of MSU and the teams that were working together, and I was never a part of that.
Going back to paragraph 22 of your witness statement on page 6, please. In the third line, you say, looking back, I can see that basing the whole process around a single peak arising from an incident per problem was not good, and it's likely that there is a methodology in existence somewhere for handling this type of situation better. Firstly, what did you mean that the system was, that the whole process was handled around a single peak?
Well, if a peak comes in, yes, it's a new system problem. We identify where it is. We send it off to development to do something with it. So strictly speaking, at that point, it's off my desk. I don't need to do any more about it. But that is not always sensible, because it's not picking up on further occurrences. It's not making sure we've got the fullest picture of it. And I just felt it would have been better if it was at that point logged as a problem, and then if you get more occurrences, you would link the peaks to it, so you do have that view of what it's affecting. And then you might have to have several actions coming off that problem for who's meant to be doing stuff to fix it, pick up the pieces, inform post office and all the rest. But that was my personal view.
Was that your view held at the time?
It's certainly a view I came to while I was still working, yes.
Did you tell anyone about it?
Yes.
Who did you tell?
I'm pretty certain I had a conversation with Mick Peach about it, but I can't be certain.
And what was the response?
Nothing, no positive outcome.
What does that mean, no positive outcome?
I sort of got the impression that, well, this is the way we work, this is how we're doing it.
One might get the impression that there were a series of hermetically sealed cells within Fujitsu, the principal aim of which was to get a service ticket off their desk. And then those hermetically sealed cells were themselves rather sealed from the post office client. Would that be fair?
I would say to some extent that's fair. I would also say that I personally tried to break down some of those seals a bit. And I think it wasn't just me doing that. And I don't think it's you know, it wasn't just a matter of passing something on because we didn't want to be holding it anymore. It was passing it on because that's where it's got to go next, because, you know, you don't want to be sitting on a peak while, you know, if it's important, obviously, that it's investigated by development, or for it to go to MSU to sort out the financial consequences. So you, to that extent, you did need to pass them on in the right direction at the appropriate moments.
How might that, in your view, have improved the position of sub-postmasters in relation to the problems with the system that were afflicting them?
You mean if we'd been able, if we had, so can we go back a step? Sorry,
Yes.
what it,
The methodology that you described of an issue being raised, an examination being undertaken to see the extent to which the problem afflicted other parts of the system, and the results of that investigation drawn together in a single place.
I think it would have been easier to make sure perhaps the post office at least were always more aware of some of these problems that were having an effect at a number of branches. How much it would actually have helped the individual postmasters, I don't know.
In paragraph 42, Roman 2 of your statement, which is on page 11, you describe, if we scroll down, please, thank you, the Horizon support desk. Many of the sub-postmasters who gave evidence to us in phase one of the inquiry said that they believed that the staff in the Horizon help desk were using call scripts, i.e. that they appeared to be reading something out, some text out, some printed text. Did you ever see such printed scripts?
I can't remember. I think for some issues where, you know, because they also handled calls about printer problems, screen not coming on, all that sort of thing, they may have had printed scripts for some of that. I did spend a few days once in the help desk office in Stevenage, but I cannot remember if I saw anything actually printed out like that.
Do you know who, whether they were printed scripts or scripts on a screen,
I don't know.
was responsible for the creation of them?
I don't know. I have no memory of ever being involved in the creation of anything like that myself.
And have you got any memory of anyone else in the SSC being involved in the creation of call scripts?
No.
In the paragraph above, when you're dealing with the MBSC, you say in the last line the MBSC had no direct interface with the SSC,
Yeah.
and the two teams had no access to each other's call logging systems.
Yes.
Why did you have no access to the MBSC call logs?
I presume because they were part of a completely separate organisation, because they were run by Post Office.
Would it be beneficial for you, would it have been beneficial for you to have had access to the actual logs to see what sub-postmasters were actually saying?
Occasionally, at times, it might have been, but in fact, they usually had to give the same information to the Horizon support desk. So, but there might have been occasions where it was useful to know what else a branch had been talking about recently. But that there might also have been a lot of business issues that were nothing to do even directly with Horizon, I'd have thought.
Before the break, can we address ARQ data, please? If we turn, please, to page 16 of your witness statement in paragraph 51. You say, when it came to branch problems, we could only work on the basis of what was recorded on the system and any extra information which the postmaster or clerk could provide. We could not see what had physically occurred in the branch, whether, for example, there was an inputting error that was not evident from the pattern of riposte messages. Sometimes that meant we could not provide an answer to explain the discrepancy because none of the forms of evidence available to us gave any indication that there were no inconsistencies in the figures recorded and calculated by Horizon. In these circumstances, we would have to record that we could not find any evidence of a systems error.
Yes.
We have heard described in the inquiry a species of audit data called ARQ data.
Yes.
What do you understand ARQ data to refer to?
Right, ARQ data was all the messages written on the branch counters as they replicated to the data centre were also streamed off into a large series of very, very large files, which were then, end of each day, can't quite remember, but in some way sort of securely locked, and then could only be accessed again through the special audit systems. If an audit extract was requested by Post Office, they would have to say the branch that they wanted and the date range. And the standard information I think that Post Office got for one of these inquiries was, well, it was 2 spreadsheets it ended up as, and one was the transaction data messages and the other was the riposte event messages. So they would be, I think, in date order, or it may still have been in the data as received at the data centre. So it was a subset of the whole lot, but it was all the transaction data. It was also possible to get an unfiltered set, which would be all these messages in their entirety. And
Did you say all messages?
All messages, yeah. This, I'm talking here about Legacy Horizon. It was very slightly different for HNGX.
And so transaction data messages, riposte messages, and also possible to get unfiltered, an unfiltered set of all messages.
Yes, transaction data, riposte events, that's log on, log off, those sort of things. But it was possible to have the unfiltered set.
It's been suggested by some witnesses that the ARQ data equated to data that recorded every keystroke made by a sub-postmaster in branch.
That was never captured.
Simplifying matters, was it therefore the data when a sub-postmaster committed what they had done to the stack, essentially?
Yes, because the messages got written to the message store, the transaction messages were written to the message store when the basket was settled.
And where was that data stored?
At what point? Do you mean the ARQ data?
The ARQ data.
On secure servers somewhere.
Do you know where?
No.
For how long was it stored?
I don't know, because that was never my responsibility. But for lots of years.
You say in this paragraph here, you couldn't see what had happened in branch, whether there was an error inputting that wasn't evident from a pattern of riposte messages,
Yeah.
and therefore you were left with no evidence of a systems error.
Yeah.
In those circumstances, couldn't you use the ARQ data?
No, because the ARQ data, well, I'm not saying here that we couldn't see what had happened in the branch. We could see from the message stores that we looked at the transactions, messages being committed and so on. And we could also see the extra messages that gave us some extra clues as to what had been going on sometimes. But the ARQ data was just that same data, but stored in a different place.
So it wouldn't have shown you anything more at all?
No.
And so is that why you didn't obtain such data, the ARQ data, when investigating what I'll call a simple or common or garden peak?
Yeah, we felt there was no need to go to the ARQ data because we had the same information that we could get out of the message store on the correspondence service.
And so your view was that there was nothing additional in the ARQ data than the data that you had access to would have shown you?
It was exactly the same data.
Was there a cost to obtaining the ARQ data?
I believe it was something that Post Office were charged for, or they had a certain number that they could ask for in a year, but above that they had to pay.
Did that have any effect on the extent to which ARQ data was obtained?
Not as far as I was concerned. If I was investigating something that had happened a very long time ago and I needed to look at that old data, then I would ask for it and I would get it. And I don't recall that anybody ever tried to charge me for it or suggested that I should be charged for it.
In what circumstances would you therefore obtain ARQ data?
If for some reason I was specifically asked to go and look at something that had happened a long time ago, I can't now, except for one instance, remember doing it as, it certainly wasn't something that was done as a matter of course, because normally, if something had happened a very long time ago, we probably wouldn't be expecting to investigate it.
The one incident you can remember, is that because there may have been others that you've forgotten, or it's likely that in your 16 years you only had cause to access ARQ data once?
I have a feeling it was more than once, but I can't, it was possibly in relation to prosecutions and so on, or some investigation that somebody wanted doing, but I cannot now remember much by way of detail.
And why would you access that data rather than the data that you would habitually use in the case of a prosecution?
Because it had, well, that would be for anything that had happened more than a month, 5 weeks ago, you would have to go, you wouldn't have any other sources of data except the ARQ data.
The only place you could find it?
Yes.
Thank you. On that note, might that be a convenient moment?
Yeah.
It's 10 past now, I think.
So 10 minutes or 15, which do you think?
Knowing where I am in my notes, 10 minutes, please.
Fine.
Thank you.
10 minutes, that's 20 past then, is it, Mr. Beer?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, sir. Can I turn to the 10th topic under this heading then, which is attributing a problem to user error and doing so as a default option. The inquiry, Mrs. Chambers has heard some evidence on the default use of user error within Fujitsu in the absence of any other explanation. And I want to look at some materials, please, that address the question of attributing a fault to user error or a discrepancy to user error. Can we start, please, with Fujitsu 8802302. Fujitsu 00082302. Thank you. We can see this is Kel Atcher, which I think is one of yours, Chambers,
Yes.
1717T. It's raised by you, we can see in the fourth line on the 30th of July 2010 and closed or last updated by you on the 10th of February 2015. We can see from the symptoms section of the KEL that the branch complained they had a loss of £240 on one day. MBSC had been unable to find any reason for the discrepancy, so the call was sent to Horizon to check for system errors. And then scrolling down problem, you say a discrepancy is the difference between the cash the system thinks the branch should have based on previous balance figure and the transactions recorded since and the cash declared by the branch. Possible causes: 1, postmaster has made an incorrect declaration; 2, transactions as recorded on the system do not match what actually happened at the branch; 3, outstanding recovery; 4, withdrawn products; 5, known system problem. These should be monitored for or be easy to spot from events. 6, unknown system problem. Solution. Scroll down, please. Thank you. Make sure MBSC have already investigated and include details of what they investigated and found on the call. 2, which stock unit is affected. 3, trading period, balance period, question mark. Which day did the discrepancy occur, question mark. How much is it? If the discrepancy was apparent only when they balance, when before this were figures correct? Do they do a nightly variance check after declaring cash? And then you put a note in capitals. SSC do not accept discrepancy calls until all information on the investigation performed by MBSE is detailed, and they have advised why they believe there is a software fault. Solution. At the foot of the page, when responding, if they've given specific examples that you can explain, do so. Otherwise, make clear it's not a system problem, assuming that you've checked that everything adds up. See a peak ending in 446 for an example response, which may help with the wording. And so it's a summary of what you're saying in this KEL to the earlier lines of support. Do your homework. Follow the proper processes before referring a discrepancy up to us in the SSC.
Yes.
And it was therefore an attempt, was it, at discouraging them from, in some cases, sending cases up to the SSC?
I don't think we were discouraging them, but we wanted them to get as full a picture as they could of whatever information was available about the circumstances, which we could then use to inform our investigation.
And if we go back to the bottom of page 1, thank you, under the note, you're effectively telling them you've got to believe that there is a software fault before you refer it on to us.
We certainly felt that NBSC should help the branch to rule out any likely user errors.
Well, is my the premise of my question right, that you were telling the earlier lines of support that before referring a problem on to SSC, they should believe that there is a software fault?
Well, that was what we were there to investigate, was software faults.
So yes.
So, yes. But obviously they could not tell definitively if there was one or not.
That's what I was going to ask you. How could the HSH or the SMC identify or analyse whether there was a software fault?
They weren't asked to do that. They were only asked if they believed there was a software fault, and a belief is not the same as a proof.
And so what quantum of proof did they need?
Well, they didn't.
Quantum
They
of
only
belief
needed-
that
They
did
only
they
needed
need?
to believe it. We wanted them to have done, I think it was that we felt we shouldn't be investigating these types of calls, given that a discrepancy is most likely to be caused by an issue at a branch. I'm certainly not saying that's the only cause, but overall, I think most branches would accept that from time to time they would have a discrepancy of some amount. And so we did want to make sure that the normal checks had been made before it came over to us, really, as a last resort.
Amongst the possible causes that are listed is unknown system problem.
Yeah.
I think it follows that the first two lines of support would not be able to identify if there was an unknown system problem, would they?
No.
So were you expecting them to investigate whether the discrepancy that they had been told about was the consequence of a known system fault?
We more wanted them to try and rule out discrepancies caused by business errors at the branch.
And by business errors, you mean?
Accounting errors at a branch. Well, not accounting errors, but, you know, could they have mistyped an entry somewhere?
And then over the page, in the instructions to, I think, the SSC,
Yes.
at the foot, you say when responding, so that's when you, SSC people,
Yeah.
are responding to the lower lines of support.
Yeah.
If they, that's the lower lines of support, have given specific examples that you can explain, do so.
Yeah.
Otherwise, make clear it's not a system problem, assuming you've checked that everything adds up.
Yes.
What does that mean? Make it clear it's not a system problem.
Once you've checked everything and have not been able to find any sign of any system problem. So I think I explained before that, you know, you'd get your running totals of the system cash position, and you'd compare it with what the system had calculated its position was at a particular point in time. You'll compare the two. If those two weren't equal, then yes, you do have a system problem, and then you've got to find out if it's a known one or an unknown one. But if the two figures are in step, the system has calculated the discrepancy correctly, then you've got to try and see which transaction or set of transactions might not be right, which is leading to the discrepancy. And if you can identify something that looks suspect, then could that have been caused by a system error? And if you can't find anything looking suspect, you can't find any events, anything else indicating any sign of a system problem, then you are left with the fact that the system thinks there should be so much in the drawer, but the postmaster is saying there's a different amount in the drawer. The only way you're going to find why those two amounts is different is if you can identify something recorded on the system that doesn't match what actually took place at the branch.
Didn't that create a default position that in the absence of evidence of a system error being provided by the sub-postmaster themselves and the absence of evidence of a problem fitting with a known existing system error, the problem would be written up as user error?
Or an unknown system error. I mean, if you've got an unknown system error, it's going to have left some trace somewhere in the numbers that will give you a clue as to where it is, what sort of transaction. But there's no way that somebody investigating that problem with no knowledge of what's being carried out at the branch can say that there doesn't match what they actually did at the branch on the day. So to that extent, yes, we were dependent on the postmaster being able to say, hang on, why is that there gone in for £2,500 when it was only £250? Me investigating, I'm not going to be able to know that it should have been £250, but actually there's £2,500.
And what weight was accorded to the statement by a sub-postmaster who had proactively raised with the post office and with Fujitsu a discrepancy that he hadn't, in that example, put in the £250?
So you're saying, so if he is saying, look, it says 2,500, but I only put in 200. If he could say it's that line there, then we would look at everything to do with that line there to see if we could see any signs of it being a system problem that had caused it.
But what if it came to him saying, no, it says £2,500 there, only 250, it was only £250. What weight, where he's the one that proactively raised this by calling in, what weight was accorded to what he was saying?
Quite a lot of weight. We wouldn't automatically say, oh, you must have got it wrong. But if he's then got to that point where he can identify it, we can at least do something about the financial side of it, in that he now knows which line is wrong, and we can attempt to pass this information through to post office so that that line, whatever it was, could be rectified in his accounts, which to some extent is the important thing to be done in the short term. Longer term, if you've had a lot of branches all reporting that precise type of problem, you would have to try and work out how come it could be wrong. But in practice, I don't recall anything specifically like that.
Can we take a look at a practical example? You'll see that this Kel mentions at the end there the peak ending in 446.
Yes.
Can we look at that peak, please? It's Fujitsu 0008 3493. You should see that that's a peak ending in 446. It's dated, or it's raised on the 12th of November 2013. Yes. And the problems described in the peak summary as postmaster doing cash declarations every now and again has major loss. Yes?
Yes.
We can see from the progress narrative, the first entry, exactly the same is entered. And then if we scroll down to the foot of the page, we get a bit more detail. Do you see the entry at 134000? It's about halfway down this page. Yes, that one. Thank you. Postmaster has had cash declaration problem throughout the year and is losing a lot every now and again. He phoned up helpline, told him can't of declared properly. I think that means he phoned the helpline who told him that he can't have declared properly. Yes. He states that he loses £2,000, then jumps suddenly to £4,000. At one point they lost £8,000 and is always losing money. Postmaster stated he has 3 post offices. It only happens at this site. Advised I would get this call sent to Peak to look for any software error. And then a little further on, only done cash declaration on back office counter, hasn't tried on any other counter, done a declaration this morning and had a £6,000 loss. It shows no error message when doing it, no report prints out, only print out of cash declaration. Then if we go over to page 2, please, and look at the entry about 5 or 6 lines in at 140100. Thank you. Voiced, I think that means made a voice call to NBSC, quoting a reference, to see what checks they have done themselves before transferring call to Horizon. They stated they had trainers come into the office and ruled out user error. Just ask you to remember that line, please. And then on the same page at 1457 at 05. So that's, yes, in the middle of the page now. NBSC called in for a message for Rob. NBSC states the user error checks were carried out by auditors at the site and not over the phone. Advised I would update the call. And I'd ask you to remember that message too. And then we come to your entry same day at 1550:04. And you say, when the variance is checked following a cash declaration, the system compares the declared amount against the expected amount, i.e. the opening cash figure for the period adjusted by all cash movements since then. I've checked the system figures in the declared figures for stock unit AA since the rollover on the 7th of November and can confirm that all the variance reported since then have been calculated correctly. There are no known issues that will result in the variance being incorrect. For example, on the 7th of November, the opening cash figure rollover was £60,125. £22,300 was remmed in, £6,500 was transferred out. Single SC transaction for £11,183.60 in. So at this point, there should be £83,038.60 in the drawer. Cash declaration at 15:29 hours is £81,580, i.e. £5,528.60 short, though the variance wasn't checked at this point. I can't tell why the declared cash doesn't match the expected figure. The branch need to make sure that what they have recorded on the system is correct and investigate the anomalies. Please pass this back to NBSC. Yes?
Yes. I did also cover this in my witness statement.
Yes. Now, the final part of your conclusion there is that there were no known issues that will result in the variance being incorrect. And I can't tell why the declared cash doesn't match the expected cash. The branch need to make sure that what they've recorded on the system is correct and that they should investigate the anomalies.
Yes. Yes.
The NBSC had got the trainers to go physically to the branch to establish what had occurred and in particular whether that was a case of user error, hadn't they?
Yes.
That was significant information, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and I took that on board.
And auditors had gone to the branch for the same purpose rather than seeking to find out what had gone wrong on the phone, hadn't they?
It appears so, yes.
And both had come back and said this is not a case of user error, hadn't they?
Yes.
And so how, please, was the sub-postmaster going to investigate the anomaly?
I don't know. I felt by giving some specific examples of a specific day where actually very little had happened, but they were already £5,500 short, apparently. If they could compare those 3-4 figures that I gave, perhaps they would be able to see which of those was wrong in that process, in what I could see. And although I only gave the figures that very simple point from the beginning of November, from the beginning of the period, I had actually done this check that I've already described, and in every case where the system cash figure was calculated, it was in line with what it should have been. So it wasn't that messages were not being picked up and included in the accounts. Everything seemed to be there. The branch was declaring how much cash they'd got. When every time they did that, they got a report printed out that showed the cash declaration. Something was not right. And yes, the numbers were jumping about all over the place. The discrepancies were varying because they kept declaring wildly different amounts of cash.
Was it them declaring wildly different amounts of cash or the Horizon system?
It definitely appeared to be them, and I did, of course, wonder if it could be something that was wrong with the declaration mechanism. But again, they got the report printed out that showed them what the declaration was, and I would have expected that if they had declared, so because they had to declare by denomination, I would have expected that they would quite easily be able to see if what was on their report didn't match the piles of cash that they had sitting in front of them. I'm not happy. Sorry. I'm not very happy with this peak. I don't think I handled it terribly well. I was frustrated by it, and I think that shows, and I was still frustrated by it when I wrote the bit in the witness statement, because, you know, it really looked like there was a genuine problem, but there was no sign of it. The figures, you know, when you added everything up, yes, the discrepancy based on what they'd done, what they declared, the discrepancy was apparently correctly calculated. Well, it was correctly calculated. So what was it in the data that was going into these calculations that wasn't right? And I couldn't see it. And you know, when you've got 3 transactions and at the end of it they're out by £5,500, but you're adding up the numbers. It's not a matter of my belief or not. It's objective. That was what was there. So something definitely wasn't right. But I couldn't see it without being in the branch.
An auditor and a trainer had been in.
Yes, I wish I could have worked with them to try and get to the bottom of this, but that was not, as far as I was aware, that was not an option.
If we go back to page 1 at the top, please. You closed this call off, top right, 4 lines in, closed, no fault in product, didn't you?
I couldn't find a fault in the product.
Because you couldn't find one, are you therefore saying this was user error by the sub-postmaster?
Not necessarily user, well, I didn't know what it was. Perhaps I should have just put, I can't remember if there was an unknown category.
Well, maybe look at page 3, please. A top box, 155004, entered by you. Defect cause updated to general user.
Yeah.
You're saying it's the user error, aren't you?
I'm saying I was very frustrated by it because, if you like, I wanted to find the system error.
That doesn't come across at all in this note, does it? You've closed this off saying there's no fault in the product. The defect is the sub-postmaster, haven't you?
That's how it comes over, yes.
Well, is there a different way of reading it?
That there must be something that they could have spotted at the branch to give us a clue as to what was happening.
In the light of what the trainers and the auditors had found in the branch, how could you possibly say there was no fault in the product and this was a user error?
Because the numbers added up.
Can we look at your witness statement, please, at paragraph 183, which is on page 52. where you were asked about this entry. And 8 lines in, 8 or 10 lines in, you say this could be user error or potentially system error, but could only be identified by the branch. Can you see that?
Yes.
Here you seem to accept that this could be a user error or a system error.
Potentially.
Why did you write it up as no fault in the product and that it was a user error then?
Because I was rather frustrated by feeling that I couldn't fully get to the bottom of it. But there was no evidence for it being a system error.
Does that mean there was no evidence that you saw? What I'm trying to get at is the use of the phrase unknown system error. All right, and there are 2 ways I could take that. One is that there is evidence of a system error, but you can't identify the root cause. The other is that there is a system error on balance of probability, but you simply don't know what it is.
I felt that there was just something was obviously wrong in that the branch obviously were getting these discrepancies that they weren't expecting. But all I could see on my side was that they were apparently declaring these differing amounts. And I certainly didn't know of any system errors that would cause that to happen, or that would take what they were declaring and not record it correctly. And I couldn't see any signs of that happening, and nobody was saying, look, we declared this, but on the report it says that. So I felt on balance, there was just no evidence of a system error.
But as I've understood the line of questioning that Mr. Beer's been putting to you, it's not just that the sub-postmaster was making the error, whatever that was, but the auditor and the trainer were making the same error. Is that it, or have I misunderstood it?
Yeah, I don't know why I'd have thought if the report was showing something, but then on the system it was recorded as a different amount, I would have expected the auditor or the trainer to have spotted that. Now I feel maybe I could have made steps to try and talk to the auditor or the trainer and to try and talk through it a bit more. But no, I'm not happy with this one. But I still stand by there being no indication of a system error, and the numbers that they were recording just didn't make a lot of sense.
You've been told by the peak itself that the problem was a recurring one.
Yeah.
It had happened throughout the year.
I'm not sure I remembered that, but
That was in the peak that we looked at. Did you think, how likely was it that this was a persistent human counting error by the sub-postmaster? Or did you think that the very report itself of a repetitious error was itself suggestive of some system fault?
I think I thought that it just looked possibly like a certain amount of carelessness. I don't know, I couldn't explain it. But I also, perhaps in my knowledge of the whole system, couldn't understand, that a problem like that just affecting one branch. That's very unlikely, but that was probably at the back of my mind.
What checks did you make to see whether it had affected any other branch?
I'm not aware that around this same period of time, any other branch had knowingly reported a similar problem.
I
But-
asked a different question. What checks did you make to see whether it had affected any other branch?
I don't know that I made any direct checks, but at that point I would have seen any calls like that were coming into SSC.
You knew
But-
by this time, 2013, that it was not always possible immediately to find a fault in the system, wasn't it? You knew that from your past experience of system faults with Horizon. Much investigatory work needs to be undertaken.
You can usually see evidence of a fault. You might not be able to get to the root of it very easily, but you can usually, if a system fault has occurred, there's normally some sign of it, specifically that the numbers don't add up.
We saw that this call was allocated to you at 2:34 p.m. and that you wrote it up as closed, no fault with product, user error, at 3:50 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So assuming that you picked up the call at exactly the moment it was assigned to you, you spent an hour and 14 minutes on it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And what did you do in that time?
I would have done more or less what it said in the peak, the KEL ACHA 17170. Extracted the transaction data from the branch database, which is what had replaced the message stores. Added up the cash, checked the variance calculations, matched the system figure at each point.
Over what period?
Since the 7th of November, I think it was, so it was best part of a week. Well, that was the week that they'd given the specific examples for.
What about what the sub-postmaster had said in the peak, that this has been a problem throughout the year?
I probably didn't go back before.
I'm sorry, you probably...
I probably didn't check back beyond the 1 week for which they had given sort of specific examples about it varying by £2,000 and £4,000.
And why not?
Because I wasn't sure it would give me any more than showing that their declarations seem to be varying so wildly.
Does what you've done as displayed by this peak indicate your more general approach to the effect that if you couldn't positively see a system error, the default conclusion that any discrepancy is the fault of the user?
If there's no indication at all of a system error, then yes, that's the inference that you draw from that.
And was that the operating approach of others within the SSC? Unless there's positive evidence of a system error, it is the sub-postmaster's fault.
We weren't necessarily assigning blame. We were saying there was no indication of a system error.
Writing off a peak user error.
In this case, yes, which I've already said I probably shouldn't have done.
In the Horizon Issues trial, the court was given evidence that between the 1st of January 2011 and the 31st of December 2014, the SSC received 27,005 calls, meaning that on average there were 563 calls per month.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound about right? About between 500 and 600 calls or tickets a month?
It sounds like quite a lot, but it's probably about right.
The inquiry has heard evidence that the SSC was under pressure to close peaks because of the pressure of work. Is that how you felt when you worked in the SSC?
No. I mean, how many of those calls were counter-related?
And the evidence doesn't disclose that. Was there any pressure at all on you to close peaks prematurely?
No.
In paragraphs 27 to 29 of your witness statement, there's no need to turn them up at the moment, you address the prioritisation of tickets within the SSC.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any financial implications with respect to the prioritisation of tickets?
I was trying to remember, and I think in there I say yes, there may have been something, but I couldn't remember it. I think I've read more documents since which have reminded me that some types of calls, some of the reconciliation calls involving sorting out where people's bank accounts might be adrift, or where bill payments might not be going through, those had to be resolved pretty quickly. That meant making sure that the financial implications were resolved, but if there was a root cause that needed further investigation, that would still be done after the financial side of things was dealt with. So yes, we were aware some calls you couldn't leave lying around for long, but that didn't mean that they had to be closed.
We can take the witness statement down from the screen, thank you. How quickly did the different priority tickets need to be resolved before any financial penalty was imposed on Fujitsu for late resolution?
I can't remember the details. As I said, I don't think it was all calls. I thought it was just a certain type of calls, and a priority was probably within 24 hours to get the financial side of it sorted.
If a ticket wasn't given the priority that you thought it needed, would you formally change the priority, or would you just get on with the ticket?
It would depend where it was going. If it was something that I was dealing with, I might not change it, but I would still treat it as I thought it needed doing.
Were performance statistics kept of your team in terms of resolution?
You'd have to ask my manager.
Were you aware in the 16 years you worked there that performance statistics were kept?
No.
Was there any element of performance-related pay in the SSC?
No.
Can we turn, please, the last topic for today, I think, to remote access. I want, please, to look at the nature and extent of remote access within the SSC, the extent to which individual branches were notified of issues that affected them, and who was responsible for such communications. Can we start, please, with Fujitsu 0008 8036? You'll see this is a document entitled Secure Support System Outline Design.
Yes.
And it's dated the 2nd of August 2002, so about 2 years into your tenure at the SSC.
Yes.
And at the foot of the page, you can see that one of the approval authorities is Mick Peach,
Yes.
but you're not on the either the distribution, the approval, or the reviewer list. Okay. Was this the kind of document that would be filtered down to you? Just go back to the top. So you can see.
Yeah, I have no recollection that I ever saw it.
That could be because 21 years have passed.
It could well be.
But
yes.
is it the type of document that would be provided to you?
It would probably be put on our website for us to read.
So an
Which isn't the
intranet.
same thing. So yes, an intranet. But as I say, I've no idea whether I did read it at the time.
Can we go to page 15 of the document, please? Let's see whether what it says is correct. It's the paragraph 4.3.2, third line, and operational support.
Yeah.
All support access to the Horizon system is from for physically secure areas. You told us, I think, for so far as the SSC is concerned, that's correct.
Yes.
Individuals involved in the support process undergo more frequent security vetting checks. Were you aware that you underwent more frequent security vetting checks than some other unnamed people?
No, I know I was vetted when I first joined, but I wasn't aware of
Being re-vetted
being re-vetted.
in the 16 years afterwards?
Yes.
Other than the above controls, other than the above, comma, controls are vested in manual procedures requiring managerial sign-off, controlling access to post office counters where update of data is required. Otherwise, third line support has 1, unrestricted and unaudited privileged access, system admin, to all systems, including post office counter PCs. 2, the ability to distribute diagnostic information outside of the secure environment. This information can include personal data, as defined by the Data Protection Act, business sensitive data, and cryptographic key information. Is it correct that at this time, 2002, you in the SSC third line support had unrestricted access to all systems, including post office counter PCs?
If that's what it says, yes.
Was it your experience that that is correct?
We had access. I didn't ever test it to find how unrestricted it was.
It says that such access was unaudited. Was that correct as well?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
The paragraph continues, the current support practices were developed on a needs-must basis. Third line support diagnosticians had no alternative other than to adopt the approach taken, given the need to support the deployed Horizon solution. Was that your understanding of why you had been given unrestricted and unaudited privileged access to all systems, that it wasn't planned, it wasn't part of the design, it wasn't the architecture, it was reactive to events?
Not sure that I thought about it. I joined the SSC and I was shown, said, if you need to access a counter, this is how you connect up to it, and so on. These were systems that I wasn't particularly familiar with, so I just did what I was told on the occasions when I did need to access a counter.
So you didn't address your mind particularly to how it had come about that you had such unrestricted and unaudited access? You just took it as given that you got it?
Yes, I probably didn't question whether it was audited or unaudited at that point. It was something that was needed at times to do our job.
Can we move forwards a year then, please, to FUJ 3088082? This is a document described as a support guide for the Open SSH. Can you recall what the Open SSH was?
Yes, I do remember at some point the way we accessed counters and other systems as well changed, and SSH rings a bit of a bell, so yes, this is what we switched to.
And so this document, again, is not signed off by you, reviewed by you, or on its face distributed to you, but the process would have been something that you would have been familiar with by June 2003, is that right?
I imagine so, because we would have changed to using the method that's documented in here.
We can see the date on the top right of 30th of June 2003. And if we go to page 6, please. And it appears that this was an attempt to I'm going to call sort out the the unaudited and unrestricted privileged access that the SSC had. Can you see in the second paragraph of the introduction, it says it's necessary for security and auditing purposes to provide a method that allows data center and counter systems to be managed interactively, but for all these management actions to be captured. When these actions have been captured or logs, it must be possible to audit the actions. This in turn means the logs must be in an easily understandable format.
Yes.
The report then goes on, I'm not going to go through it, to explain the different ways the system produces an audit trail for all actions performed during what I'm going to call remote access.
Yep.
What was your understanding of the process that had to be undertaken after the introduction of this process in June 2003?
I think I was aware that everything would be captured and logged somewhere, but I didn't know and don't know any more details than that.
Can we go, please, to FUJ 0013 8355? Can you see that this is a document created by your manager, Steve Parker, on the 8th of September 2011,
Yes.
and was last updated by somebody called Adam Woodley in February 2021?
Yes.
And you'll see what Mr. Parker said. GDPR regulations require that access to personal data remain within the European Union, and PCI data security standards mandate physical security restrictions must be applied where data access is allowed to user data. Currently, the only units which fulfill all these requirements for data access are the SSC and ISD Unix. Do you know what ISD Unix was?
I think they were the operations team based in Belfast.
The responsibility for data correction is vested in the SSC, although ISD sometimes act under SSC authorization via the application of a tested script. Corrections to live system data must be authorized via account change control and auditable. Any correction requiring apps up role is to be witnessed by a second member of the SSC. Both names must be recorded on the change control for audit purposes.
Yes.
This appears to describe in 2011 the so-called 4 eyes approach, or 4 eyes method, namely one person from the SSE logs on to the counter and makes the, I'm going to call them corrections, to the branch's transactions, whilst another person watches, doesn't it?
Yes.
And they were supposed to write a narrative account of what they've done and record the names of both people, weren't they?
Yes. I can't remember if the second person was meant to add their own name themselves, but can't remember.
Just look under data corrections. Support investigation may indicate the need for data correction. In this context, data correction is any support action that results in the modification or removal of post office data. If any correction is required, then details must exist in the form of a narrative on or attachments to a peak incident to provide a clear audit trail. An approved account change control entry must also exist and be cross-referenced from the peak. Then financial data, changes to financial data are rarely required. Where a requirement exists, such changes must be made via contra-journal entries to maintain audit trail, and the change must be made using the 2-man rule. The 2-man rule, sometimes called the 4 eyes rule in security circles, specifies that there must be 2 individuals that must act in concert to perform the same action. Further, each individual should have comparable knowledge and skill in order to detect attempts of subversion initiated by the other. within the SSC, one member of SSC will perform the data correction whilst the second member of the SSC will witness the change being made. Both names must be recorded on the change control for audit purposes.
Yes.
And so this process depends on people in SSC or carrying out faithfully and recording what they're supposed to have done.
Yes, or what they did do.
Yes.
Yes.
You remember the 2003 document that we looked at? I didn't take you through its details, but do you recall that if it had been carried into effect, would have required that a securely managed ID user had been recorded and logged in real time against each and every action performed, rather than an after the event narrative description of what we have done?
I'm sorry, I don't remember that document. That was the SSH, Open SSH document?
No, it was the document that I took to you at some speed through in the interest of time.
Sorry.
Well, you can go back to it. It's FUJ 0008 8082. FUJ 308 8082.
Yes, the Open SSH
You remember this?
support. Yeah. Yes, it was the Open SSH support guide.
And if you turn to page 8, I'm afraid you'll just kind of read that quietly to yourself, the basic procedure.
That procedure is just talking about creating the users, not the users using the systems.
Yes, and then if you go on to page 10 on the logging server and scroll down. And then look at 5.2.
Yes. Sorry, I can't.
Sorry, you said you can't.
I'm not sure what I'm meant to be looking for in here.
Okay, and then go on to 5.3.
Right, so the logging gets written to a file on the SAS server.
And then over the page to 6.1 and 2.
Yeah, so this is connecting to counters or central servers. Yes, I remember doing those things.
And then down the page to 6.2.1. And then over the page, please. And then scroll down to the bottom of the page. As I'd read this, Mrs. Chambers, the system, if it had been carried into effect, required by this document, would have first required users to log in using their own names and passwords. Then, when connecting to the counters, they logged in using a special user ID. And that special user ID would be logged in real time against each and every action that the user then performed. Yes?
Yes, I think that was the case, although I can't recall I don't think I ever saw any of this logging.
No.
But yes, we did. But if we go back to what you were then asking me about for data changes on HNGX, those weren't made on the counter. That wasn't because the data was no longer held on the counters.
And so that explains the difference, does it, between what we read in Mr. Parker's minute of 2011 and what is described here?
Possibly, yes, because I think there was all this background logging going on, which we were really almost meant to be unaware of. And I'm not sure if it did ever get checked to see, but there was this background audit of everything done via an SSH connection. Now, I can't remember whether this implies that also we used SSH for connecting to the central systems. I'm not sure now if that included the Unix data, the Oracle databases, which is what the 2010 document was talking about, changes to that. So it may well be that if it was still via SSH, then that would have been an additional level of logging was going on automatically anyway. But I really don't know. This was not my area at all.
I understand. Can we look at what you did understand as to the process and look at your witness statement at page 57, please? Page 57, please. And in paragraph 199 at the foot of the page. Thank you. You say, I'm asked whether a person using a branch terminal would be expressly notified by Horizon if changes were made using these access rights. It's hard to remember now what was done so long ago. If the branch had raised the service incident in the first place via HST, then I would probably have told them if I was going to make a change to their system to correct the problem. If they'd not raised it, but instead we knew there was a problem because of a reconciliation report entry and the branch had not yet done their balance, I probably would not have contacted the branch, but would have informed my manager or the Fujitsu problem manager. If the problem was notified to the post office and they had authorised the change, I'd expect post office to decide whether or not to notify the branch. So you say that you would probably have notified a branch if you were going to make a change using remote access rights if the postmaster had themselves initiated the incident.
Yes, it's as I said, it's really hard to remember what would have been done, what was done in each case. I've seen various peaks in the preparation for this. Somewhere I definitely did talk to the branch.
And others where sometimes you didn't.
Where I didn't, yeah. Also remember that making the changes would not necessarily be changes to financial data. One thing we did have to do sometimes was where a branch was unable to use one of their counters because it had been left in a slightly inconsistent state, thinking it was still in the middle of balancing, and they could sort it out for themselves if the same user logged back onto that counter. But if that user had gone off on holiday for 2 weeks, that wasn't very helpful. So there was by updating an object in the message store, basically writing a new version of the object, we could clear that flag, which would then enable them to log onto the counter and proceed as normal. That had absolutely no financial effect. So the number of changes where we were actually making a financial correction were very few and far between.
You refer in this paragraph to your manager, i.e. in the cases where the problem had been picked up by a reconciliation report entry, you say you probably wouldn't contact the branch, but you would have told your manager that you had made a change on the sub-postmaster's counter.
Yes.
Are you referring there to Mr. Peach and then Mr. Parker?
Yes, it would have been, and if it was a change that had any financial implication, then it would have needed whatever the change control system at the time was following.
You say, or you might have informed the Fujitsu problem manager. Who was the Fujitsu problem manager?
They varied over the years, but back for legacy, it was Mike Stewart and Mike Woolgar, I believe.
Sorry, the second name?
Woolgar.
Was it your understanding that any of those people, Mr. Peach, Mr. Parker, or either of the problem managers, would have contacted the branch to tell them that corrections had been made to their data?
No, I think it's very unlikely that they would have contacted the branch.
You say that in relation to, in the last part, that if the problem had been notified to the post office and they'd authorised the change, you would expect the post office to decide whether or not to notify the branch. What would affect whether or not the post office told the branch that their financial data had been altered?
I don't know. I think that's a question for post office.
Did you know of some cases where the post office did not tell the sub-postmaster that their financial data had been altered remotely by somebody within Fujitsu?
Yes, I think that definitely did happen.
Did you follow the group litigation at all?
No, not until I realised that I was being mentioned quite a lot, which was very, very near the end of it.
Did you read in that, did you see in that the post office was seeking to deny that the remote access that we are speaking about could occur?
I didn't see that at the time, certainly, and I haven't read up on it thoroughly.
So that's an appropriate moment if it is convenient to you.
Certainly, yeah. Can we take stock, so to speak? Are you still confident that all your questions and those of other legal representatives can be completed tomorrow?
In respect of the first clause in that sentence, yes. The second clause, I'm in the hands of others.
Well,
I've canvassed some views from some of my friends, and I'm covering a lot of the ground that they have asked me to cover.
right. Well, I would like you to discuss that briefly with your colleagues for this reason, that having said on Friday that we wouldn't sit on Thursday and Friday of this week, I made an appointment for myself on Thursday morning, which I do not now wish to give up because they're difficult to come by. And so I want that to be factored in to any arrangement, and I don't want to inconvenience Mrs. Chambers more than is strictly necessary. So I'd be grateful if we could work out whether we will finish tomorrow, and if not, what we do.
So we will liaise and I'll report back to you overnight.
Thank you.